It was, for most of us, the wonderful, joyful series of events, a liberation, unexpected, but still a feeling of freedom. All of a sudden, at last, or again, free. 20 years later, we can look at it from a distance and see, maybe better, or at least differently, what really happened.
These last 20 years,
W moim przekonaniu
I'm convinced,
to jest najlepsze 20 lat w historii Polski ostatnich 3 wieków.
were the best 20 years in the Polish history of the last 300 years.
Nam przyznała rację, nam, którzy uważaliśmy, że komunizm nie może być lepszy.
The Soviet Union lost the Cold War, was defeated in the Cold War, you can say. And the second thing, the second element that would be very interesting is the fact that in the Soviet Union, people came to rule the Soviet Union who believed in a naive way that communism could be made better. Of course, they were naive. Having the freedom from dictatorship 20 years ago, now we have 2 possible ways. Either we choose the sovereign democracy of the Putin type, or we choose the European liberal democracy of a state of law. And it depends only on ourselves which of those 2 solutions we will adopt.
All in all, from a historical perspective, I have to agree with Adam to say that the last 20 years, from the Hungarian point of view, is a great success. Each generation has a mission to take or to sign his own new borders, not just to accept the framework of life we inherited from our fathers. In the 80s, we looked for what kind of strategy could be the appropriate one to the new generation, which would not like to die in a country which is still ruled by the Russians. And the idea came from Adam. He wrote the civic society strategy. So don't build up a revolution, don't go into the party to reform it from inside, but instead of them, to neglect them and to build up small islands of civic society. And that was exactly the strategy we have run. So if you look at the figures of economic growth rate, it's obvious that without Central European countries, Europe or the European Union cannot be competitive on the global level. So the impact of that historical development is enormous. It's not just the story of Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, or even not just the story of Central Europe. We created a new age.
In Germany, that didn't happen. In Germany, there was not a self-propelled, self-initiated process in East Germany to build a free nation rather than a dictatorship. They tried to separate West Germany and East Germany by an effort of constituting East Germany historically as a separate state, not only technically, and that didn't work. The substance of East Germany could not be totally separated from West Germany. When the wall came down, this was an irreversible process.
1989 was the end of the short 20th century, which was characterized by a global competition between 3 great ideologies: communism, fascism, and liberal democracy. This is the most amazing fact. A nuclear-armed superpower gave up its empire with hardly a shot fired in anger. There are very, very few new things in history, ladies and gentlemen, but that new model of revolution, which in some sense was invented in Central Europe in 1989, is one of them. I want to suggest that 1989 may possibly be the best moment in European history. In European history. Suggest to me a better one. I mean, it was the most extraordinary pan-European moment. I also want to suggest, in case you're feeling complacent, that it may be possibly the last moment at which Europe was at the very center of world history. And what you hear in China and in Russia with sovereign democracy and in Brazil and South Africa is we do it our way. This is actually not a new idea. It's a very old European idea. Cujus regio, eius religio. It goes back to the Treaty of Westphalia. It's the idea of the sovereign nation state which does things its way.
The negotiating solution, of course, has tremendous advantages, but also some costs. So were there other feasible strategies?
There is a lot of discussion of phrase saying that we should finally manage the transformation of political system because what has happened up to now is not enough. I disagree with this opinion because the transformation process is managed. It's over. But at the same time, it's obvious that we Hungarians, at least, have to live together with a situation which is unusual in Central Europe. The representatives or the leaders of ancient regimes prove to be stronger, more vivid politically in Hungary than anywhere else in the region. Even the argument of that time was very similar, more modern than under the communist regime, but basically similar. The communist, I mean, the ex-communist socialist political family argument was there is no alternative. You know, there is no alternative in democratic society. But that was the lesson they have given us for 4 years between 94 and 98. Protectionism is back. So the reaction of Europe to the new global situation, which was described by Timothy, is rather not go forward, but rather move back. Our economy will dry out because we are not able to get euro, because the Western bankers are not ready to give it, because the process the West European governments run, the treatment, does not allow them to do it. That kind of financial protectionism can destroy the unity of the European Union.
To była, ja bym powiedział, radość z wolności.
I would say that the big hope of 1989 was the happiness to have freedom. This was a moment of a big hope, and big hopes create always big delusions. And then we had this hard landing. The freedom has brought us democracy.
Jugosławii wolność przyniosła wojnę.
In Yugoslavia, freedom brought war. And then once again we saw that man, the human being, is beautiful only for a second.
The eruption that took place is the culmination point of a development that really started in the 70s in West Europe. We thought that we could make governments' lives easier by spending more than we had. Very simply said. The crisis, therefore, hits us rather unprepared. There is a tremendous pressure on Europe to stay together and a strong centrifugal force trying to tear it apart. We will have to go through very hard times, but there is a wonderful vision. And the vision is that this Europe doesn't want to be a military force anymore. And if Europe continues on that path, it can make a very important contribution to the world, not in the sense of power, but in the sense of knowledge, in the sense of wisdom, and in the sense of culture.
I mean, the trouble we have as Europeans is, I always like to say, we spend 60% of our time talking about the United States, 35% of our time talking about ourselves, and only 5% of our time talking about the rest of the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's up to us in Europe to look after those values, and to do that, we need some of the values and qualities we had in 1989. We need solidarity, we need courage, we need boldness, we need new kinds of thinking that we didn't have before.